There are moments in life when you realize you've tried too hard for a relationship, whether it's love, friendship, or work. You were always the one to start the conversation, the one who replied the fastest, the one who apologized first, even when the fault wasn't entirely yours. You explained, you proved, you tried your best to make them understand that, "I'm good enough, I deserve to stay." You believed that if you were patient enough, sincere enough, then one day they would finally see your worth. But then silence appears. Messages are left on read with no reply. Conversations grow shorter, emptier. Your presence, once something they looked forward to, has become nothing more than a habit they barely notice. And you, in the very space where you once tried so hard to be seen, begin to feel yourself shrinking, little by little. At some point, you ask yourself, where did I go wrong? Was I not good enough? Or did I just care too much? But then you realize the problem was never that you lacked something, but that you gave too much to someone who didn't know how to value it. That is the first moment of silence. A silence not born from anger, but from awakening. A gentle yet profound awakening, like the moment you stop struggling against the waves, let the water carry you, and suddenly realize you've drifted too far from yourself. When you stop chasing, everything begins to change. Not the world, not the other person, but you. Something inside starts to shift. You no longer feel the urge to prove, to explain, or to plead. The silence within you is no longer a sign of weakness, but the expression of a new kind of strength, the strength of letting go. The Stoics once said, "Stillness is not passivity, but disciplined restraint." And in the moment you choose silence, you realize that true peace has never depended on someone else's gaze or approval. It has always lived in your ability to let go while keeping your heart calm. When you stop chasing someone, you don't lose your value. You simply stop giving it to the wrong person. And in that moment, your silence begins to carry weight. Without words, without action, it still echoes clearly in their mind, in their memory, and in the emptiness you leave behind. Perhaps the strangest part isn't when you fall silent, but what happens afterward. When the noise fades, you begin to hear a sound you've long ignored the voice within. At first, it's faint and fragile, as if you've forgotten how to listen to yourself. But as the days pass, in the space where there are no messages, no calls, you realize that this silence isn't frightening. On the contrary, it's healing you. With no one left to prove yourself to, no one to hold on to, you begin to return to yourself. And there, you find something you had always lost amid all those meaningless chases, the strength of tranquility. From that moment of silence, a new energy begins to emerge. Not the energy of resentment, but of awareness and growth. That is where the real journey begins, where you learn to turn stillness into strength. When you stop chasing, the first thing you feel isn't peace, it's emptiness. It feels as if you've lost something familiar, not the other person, but the rhythm of your old life, where you were used to waiting, reacting, and hoping. Your mind still tries to cling to what it knows, like a body that wants to keep running even after the race is over. But then, in the quiet mornings, when your phone no longer lights up with messages, you begin to understand that this silence is not an ending. It's the beginning of something new. Silence teaches you what noise never can. It forces you to face yourself with no more roles, no more expectations, only the raw truth of what you lost while trying to make others understand you. At first, it's uncomfortable because it makes you confront the wounds you once hid behind effort and explanation. But the more you face them, the more you realize it is this very stillness that becomes the place where you begin to heal. The Stoics never saw silence as weakness. They viewed it as the discipline of the mind, the ability to restrain reaction and remain steady amid all turbulence. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." When you stop reacting to everything, you begin to gain control over yourself. You understand that true strength doesn't come from saying more, but from staying calm when everything around you tries to pull you into chaos. Stillness is not surrender, but a deeper form of awareness. When you stop arguing, you're not losing. You're simply someone who no longer needs to prove anything. When you stop texting, stop trying to be heard, you're not disappearing. You're reclaiming the energy that was once wasted in places unworthy of it. And in that moment, you feel something strange. You no longer want control, yet you've never felt more powerful. Silence begins to carry weight. It's no longer a reaction, but a quiet declaration of self-mastery. No anger, no goodbyes, no long speeches, just a gentle withdrawal, and the world starts to adjust on its own. Those who once dismissed you begin to feel confused. They try to test the waters again by sending a short message, dropping an emoji, or starting a meaningless conversation just to see if you'll still react the way you used to. They don't miss you out of love. They miss you because they've lost control. But this time, you're different. You don't need to act cold, just calm. You no longer respond quickly, not because you're playing the silent game, but because you've stepped out of the game entirely. You no longer speak from need, but from awareness. And when there's nothing that needs to be said, you choose silence. Silence, once truly understood, is no longer an empty void. It is the space where strength is reborn. And from that moment, you begin to understand what the Stoics have taught for thousands of years. Strength doesn't come from winning, it comes from the ability to remain unmoved. When the stillness within you begins to settle, it may feel like everything has come to an end. But in truth, it's only the beginning of another, deeper reality. In silence, you start to look back at everything you once did, the long messages no one replied to, the needless apologies, the countless attempts to save something that was already breaking apart. And then you realize that all along, you weren't just chasing a person, you were chasing the feeling of being acknowledged, being seen, being loved. That is the moment you realize the real reason for your exhaustion was never the other person. It was your own need to be proven, accepted, and heard. Every chase begins with a fear. The fear that if you stop running, you'll no longer be worthy of staying in someone's life. And in that moment, a new chapter begins. You start to look directly at the question, why was I chasing? Not to blame yourself, but to understand. Not to return, but to move forward with a calmer, clearer mind. Looking back, you realize that the chase was never born from love, but from fear. Fear of losing the feeling of being cared for. Fear that prolonged silence would turn you invisible. Fear that if you stopped trying, the relationship would fade, and with it, the version of yourself you believed was good enough to be loved. So you began to run, unconsciously. You ran through messages, through patience, through unnecessary apologies. You told yourself, if I just hold on a little longer, everything will go back to how it was. But the harder you tried, the more it felt like swimming against the current, while the other person simply stood still, watching you struggle. The Stoics once said, what troubles us is not the event itself, but how we perceive it. And it's true your pain didn't come from their change, but from the illusion that if you gave enough, you could make them return. When you believe love can survive on one person's effort, you lose the boundary between devotion and self-sacrifice. The imbalance begins quietly, almost imperceptibly. At first, you yield a little, stay silent a little, overlook the things that hurt you because you don't want to make it a big deal. But each time you do, you shrink a little more, giving the relationship more space to breathe. Until one day you realize you've become the person you once pitied, someone desperately holding on to what's already leaving, giving everything just to keep it alive. The irony is, the more you give, the less you're valued, not because you lack worth, but because people tend to underestimate what's always available. When you're constantly there, constantly ready, your presence becomes ordinary. They stop seeing it as something special until it's gone. In that imbalance, your self-respect slowly erodes. You start justifying their indifference. Maybe they're busy, maybe they're tired, maybe I'm just being too sensitive. But deep down, you know that what truly hurts isn't their silence, it's the way you keep tolerating it. And then at some point you realize that what you've been chasing is no longer the other person. It's the feeling of being needed, being chosen, being acknowledged. You're no longer running out of love, but out of fear, the fear of emptiness. The fear that if you stop, you'll have to face yourself in the question, who am I when there's no one left to prove my worth to? But that moment is also the turning point, Because only when you dare to face that fear do you begin to see the truth. You were never chasing love. You were running from your own loneliness. And the Stoics understood this better than anyone. They never saw solitude as the enemy, but as the teacher. For it is only in solitude that a person truly meets themselves again. And then, one day you stop. No more messages sent. No more explanations written. No more nights spent wondering what you did wrong. Everything becomes strangely quiet. You assume they'll feel relieved, that your silence will simply mark the end. But something unexpected begins to happen, not to you, but to them. When no one takes the initiative, the emptiness starts to expand. When no one reaches out, they begin to realize just how accustomed they were to being cared for. Your silence, once seemingly small, becomes the loudest sound in their mind. They start to question, to overthink, to search for the signals you've stopped sending. In that moment, you realize a truth you had never seen clearly before. The person who once made you feel small was only powerful as long as you kept chasing. When you withdraw your energy from the relationship, the balance shifts. You are no longer the weaker one, they are the ones who begin to stumble. And that is when the process of dissolution begins, not because you disappeared, but because you finally returned to yourself. The interesting thing is, when you fall silent, you're not trying to create any effect at all. You simply stop. Yet in that very moment, everything begins to shift. The one who once seemed cold and indifferent suddenly grows restless. The one who thought they held control now finds themselves in emptiness, because they realize that the peace they once took for granted was the very thing you carried with you when you walked away. Your silence is no longer an empty void, but a mirror. In it, they begin to see their own indifference, arrogance, and neglect the things they once refused to face. As long as you spoke, they had excuses. As long as you cared, they had somewhere to hide. But when you stop completely, no accusations, no messages, they have no one left to blame but themselves. The Stoics once said, "If someone does not wish to be with us, then we should wish even less to be with them." What sounds like coldness is, in truth, a form of self-respect. When you stop chasing, you're not lowering anyone. You're simply refusing to keep placing them on a pedestal they never deserved. And the moment you pull back your energy, their illusion of power begins to fade. They try to test the waters again with a short message, a casual greeting, a vague signal, just to see if you're still there. But this time, no one responds with eagerness or worry. No more "I'm fine, just a little tired," to reassure them that you haven't gone too far. Instead, there's complete silence, gentle yet impenetrable. It is that very silence that unsettles them, because in their mind, you were always the one who responded, who yielded, who held on. And now, with that gone, they no longer know what to do with their own emotions. They begin to feel empty, disoriented, lost, as if standing in a familiar room where everything they once recognized has vanished. That is dissolution, not revenge, not victory, but the natural consequence of imbalance. Because when a relationship survives only on the effort of one side, it exists only as long as that person keeps trying. And when they finally stop, the relationship doesn't end because they left, but because it had been hollow all along. Psychology calls this the Zeigarnik effect, the human tendency to be haunted by unfinished stories. When you fall silent, you leave behind a gap their mind cannot close. They start replaying every detail, analyzing every word, rereading every message, searching for the signs they missed. Not because they miss you, but because they can't bear the feeling of not knowing why. The Stoics understood this well. They knew that true power doesn't come from responding, but from the ability to remain silent when others expect a reaction. Because when you stop reacting, you force others to face themselves. There are no more answers for them to cling to. No one left to blame, only the truth, raw and heavy, staring back at them. Silence becomes a tool of awareness. It forces others to look back at how they treated you, how they took you for granted, and how they saw your presence as something ordinary. Every moment they remember you is no longer nostalgia. It's the realization that they've lost something irreplaceable. And the beautiful part is, you don't need to witness that process. You don't need to see their regret, hear their apology, or have proof that they finally realized your worth. Because once you've truly returned to yourself, you no longer need that validation. The peace within you is strong enough that nothing outside can disturb it. That is the moment you understand. When you stop, it's not that you've grown weaker, it's that they've begun to crumble. Not because of what you did, but because of what you no longer do. Not because you left them, but because you stopped feeding the illusion they depended on. Your silence becomes the lesson they are forced to learn, not through words, but through loss. And sometimes that is the only way people truly grow. When you look back, you realize something strange. While they begin to unravel, you start to find peace. The silence that once made you anxious has now become your safest refuge. You no longer check your phone constantly, no longer wait for a message to appear on a dark screen. And slowly you see that what disappeared wasn't happiness, it was dependence. As others fall apart from losing the energy you once gave, you begin to come alive again as that same energy returns to you. Everything you once used to care for, to love, to save someone else, you now use to heal yourself. And that is a beautiful turning point, the moment you stop seeking peace in others and begin to find it within your own soul. From here, the story is no longer about them. It begins to center on you, the one learning to return to your essence, to your self-control, and to a new kind of strength, the strength of stillness. After everything, you realize that the scariest part was never losing someone. It was losing yourself while trying to keep them. As the silence stretches on, you no longer feel emptiness, you feel relief. Not because you've forgotten, but because you've accepted. The need to rely on someone else to feel complete begins to fade. In its place comes a strange calm, as if you've just stepped out of a storm you no longer need to fight. Silence is no longer a punishment, but a space where you can finally hear yourself again. There, you begin to see the things once hidden beneath the noise of effort, the boundaries you ignored, the times you stayed silent out of fear of losing love, the wounds you once dismissed as no big deal. Now each crack becomes visible, yet instead of pain, you feel gratitude because at last you found the courage to face them. The Stoics said, "No one can hurt you unless you allow it." And you begin to understand the true meaning of that, not by closing your heart, but by redefining your boundaries. You no longer wish to be the one who's always ready to heal others while you're falling apart yourself. You learn to say no, to stop before you burn out, and to stay calm even when others try to pull you into their chaos. Stillness teaches you that strength isn't about winning over others, it's about mastering yourself. It's when you can hold back your reaction instead of needing to express yourself in every situation. It's when you can walk away from a conversation without needing the last word. It's when you understand that not responding is also a response, one filled with self-respect. This rebirth is not loud. It comes from within. You don't announce it, you don't prove it, you don't need anyone's validation. Yet every small action, every thought, every decision begins to change. You no longer choose relationships that require begging to be loved. You no longer confuse attention with care. You no longer mistake staying for loyalty. You begin to see your own worth, not because someone tells you that you deserve it, but because you feel it in the way you treat yourself. You spend time on what brings peace to your mind, reading, writing, meditating, or simply sitting in silence, watching the light shift through the window. You learn to enjoy the small things because ultimately, you understand that peace is not something given to you, it's something you create every time you choose not to react. The Stoics never sought happiness in perfection, but in the fullness of the present. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." And you realize that what brings you peace is not someone coming back. It's no longer needing them to. From that moment on, you begin to live differently. You enter each new day not to prove anything, but to experience it. You speak less, but what you say carries weight. You love selectively, give with boundaries, and keep a part of your energy for yourself. You no longer need to be understood because you understand yourself. You no longer need to be seen because you already see yourself clearly. And then something remarkable happens. You start attracting what is right for you. When you stop chasing, the genuine connections find their way to you. Not because you need them, but because you have become someone who is already whole. The Stoics called this the self-mastery of the soul, the state in which you are no longer ruled by emotion, but rule over it. You realize that stillness doesn't make you lonely, it makes you grounded. It doesn't make you weaker, it makes you harder to shake. It doesn't disconnect you, it helps you reconnect more deeply with yourself. And from that place, you are reborn not as a new person, but as the truest version of yourself you had once forgotten. In the end, you realize that true strength doesn't lie in disappearing, it lies in being able to stay untouched and unmoved. You no longer need to prove, to explain, or to be remembered, because the calm within your mind has grown so vast that nothing outside can disturb it anymore. Intangible means untouchable, and that is the state you're entering. You're not cold. You've simply learned to draw boundaries between yourself and the world. You're not avoiding. You just know what's worth keeping and what's meant to be released. Everything that once hurt you is now just a memory. Everyone who once made you cry is now just a lesson. And you understand, peace doesn't come when someone returns. It comes when you no longer want them to. When you reach that state, you don't need revenge. You don't feel regret. Your presence alone carries weight. You walk lightly, yet leave behind an unshakable silence in the minds of others. Because you no longer speak to be heard, you stay silent to be understood. You no longer love to be kept, you love to be free. The Stoics once taught, self-control is the highest form of strength. And when you choose silence over argument, release over attachment, departure over pleading, you are embodying that very spirit. You no longer live to be understood by others, you live to understand yourself. And once you truly understand, you no longer need anyone's agreement. If this video resonates with you, leave a single word in the comments, still, because when you stop running, the world begins to move at your pace. Hit like, share this video, and subscribe as a promise to yourself that from today, you will choose calm over chaos, stillness over reaction, and returning to yourself over chasing others.